good to go.
Hi, Site Friends. So I am happy today to introduce your presenter for our engaging session, Mike Koselny. Mike serves as Vice President of Underwriting at Florida Peninsula Insurance Company, and he has more than 40 years experience in the insurance industry. Mike's a faculty member of the National Alliance for Insurance Education and Research, and he holds various designations and has served for 25 years in many leadership roles within the CPCU Society, notably as Society President in 2017. Mike is also founder and CEO of Born to Lead, LLC, where he develops and mentors emerging leaders in every industry. So with that, Mike, I will turn things over to you, and I want to welcome you and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that very much. And the one thing you did leave out, I'm a member of SITE as well. So
Absolutely.
most recently went through the Train the Trainer program, and excited to be here today to share with you some research and some experiences that I've had in terms of sort of navigating this new norm that we're dealing with today in this industry. And I will share with you that I think the world changed for many people in March of 2020, right? That I can tell you from the perspective of my company and certainly my team, March 18th, we sent everybody home and we said, work from home. And I will tell you, we probably weren't the most prepared for that. It was sort of a got to do it now situation. And prior to that time, I could tell you with a high degree of confidence that I was not necessarily on board with the whole notion of remote working, particularly in the underwriting ranks. You know, years ago, I managed a sales team, sales reps that worked for a company that I worked for previously, and they were all remote, obviously, in different states. There was 7 states. Another company was 16 states, so I had reps in every state. And the idea of working remote for them was, I think, certainly made sense to me. And it really, I think, helped me better understand how I would deal with the situation that we faced in early 2020 as COVID-19 sort of began to spread, and we sent everybody home so that they could be safe. I think the part that probably most impressed me about my team was it took them about a week or two, maybe a month, to sort of get their bearings, their feet sort of underneath them again. And they began to perform really at the same levels that they had performed in the past. So as I started to think about this, and as we've sort of moved through this time right now, and we're in a much different place than we were prior to that as an industry, and really, I think just industry in general, not just the insurance industry, but certainly other industries as well. This whole notion of navigating the new norm was very important to me. And so I thought I'd like to chat more about this. I made this presentation with NAMIC earlier this year. I did 2 times I presented this information, and I think it was really well received. So my goal today is that I'm looking at this from 2 perspectives, not just from the employer, but we're all employees too, right? We're all dealing with the same issues. To look at it from both perspectives, not only the employer, but the employee perspective. And so that's what I hope we'll be able to share today. So after the pandemic, we're in a new world, right? And how was the global how has it changed our world? Well, kind of look back in some of the history of what took place and sort of preparing you for why the insurance industry really responded probably in a much different way. And this is information that came out of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And what they're suggesting is that jobs with the highest physical proximity to the customer were probably the most disruptive. And you think about it, restaurants, certainly hospitals were, the PPE, personal protection issues that nurses and doctors had to use in order to protect themselves. But most of the businesses that suffered the most during the pandemic were ones where they have personal contact with their customers, right? And if you look at this, as you kind of go through this chart, medical care, personal care, on-site customer interaction, leisure and travel industry, hotels struggled as well. But if you look at there, 68 computer-based office work. And when you think about much of what we do in our industry, in the insurance industry, it's really screen type work. Obviously, we have interactions with other people and our customers. Our sales team are out and about, but most of the jobs in our industry are really computer-based. And so when you think about that in terms of the transaction, I wasn't surprised to see what these numbers were, that, and our own personal experiences would suggest that's absolutely true. So here's what happened, right? So early in 2020, the unemployment rate jumped to almost 15%. And it was pretty, it took time for that to come back down, really more in terms of how employers found ways to make, to get people back in the workforce, right? To get them back and working. The unemployment rate rose to 687,000. This is again from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. The unemployment rate now is at 3.8. And the areas that had the greatest gain from early in 2020 to get us down to the levels we are today are certainly leisure and hospitality. If you stayed in a hotel now, I could tell you 3 months ago, they weren't cleaning the room every night. Today, my most recent stay when I was in Florida, I had housekeeping every night. So they have more staff to be able to accommodate those situations. You think about business and professional services, healthcare, and the construction industry, right? While early on they stayed home, I think the construction industry was one that came back much more effectively post early 2020. This is from SHRM. I thought this was a great quote. Last year, an average of more than 3.9 million workers quit their jobs each month, meaning that 2021 held the highest average on record, topping the 2019 average of 3.5 million. So you could see the impact of what COVID-19 had on the workforce and kind of where we are today. McKinsey came out and said that the pandemic accelerated existing trends in remote work. So many companies had already started remote work. Probably in the tech industries, you're starting to see more of that. E-commerce boomed. I'm sure Jeff Bezos made a lot of money, because I could tell you there was a Amazon Prime package dropped off at my front door virtually every day. In fact, multiples. So e-commerce blossomed. In fact, I don't know about you, but when I order something, if I have to wait 2 days for it, I'm thinking, why? Why do I have to wait 2 days? Why don't they have it? Why can't they deliver it tomorrow? Expectations changed dramatically. Certainly automation has improved. What they're suggesting is 25% of the more workers than previously estimated are thinking about or needing to switch occupations, because they've come to a point in their lives where the in-office experience is probably not what they want or what they really need. So just a question, you can post it in the chat if you would. How many, as an employee, how many of us have changed jobs since COVID-19? And then the next question would be, as an employer, what was your turnover? I can tell you, I didn't change jobs. I'm still at the same place. Did I have turnover during COVID-19? I would tell you very, very limited. I think I lost one person during COVID-19, and it had nothing really to do with the work or the pandemic. Actually, it was an individual who decided that they had challenges dealing with their parent, and so they needed to spend more time at home with their parent. But we were very fortunate in terms of the turnover that we had. But we know that many industries suffered during this time, and many companies were dealing with that. If you watch the news, you'd see it very regularly. So then the question comes, for the insurance profession, is this the Great Resignation, or is this just a reshuffle? And the reason I suggest that there's a difference between the two, right? Many people are leaving industries to go to other industries, maybe even the restaurant business as a server or cook, or in some role within the restaurant industry. Maybe you found a job where you could work from home as opposed to that. So there's certainly lots of movement that way. But I will share with you today that my view is that what we're seeing in the insurance industry is a reshuffle, and I'll share some insights into that. This is the overall unemployment rate back to January of 2000 through January of 2021. And you can see the dotted line is the overall. You see this giant spike here back in February or March of 2020. And now that's come back down to about 5.4. This darker blue line here is the unemployment rate in insurance related industries. And you can see in 2009, 2010, there was a bit of a spike. And you think about what happened then, right? We had the housing crisis, and there were companies that were really struggling at that time, and people were as well. And then you have this 6-month sort of moving average, but you can see it parallels that line. But the spike that happened in early 2020 in March really didn't impact the insurance industry. And the question becomes why? Why did that not have such a big impact? Well, Jacobson Group, in their third quarter 2021 employment report, said that one of the big reasons why was because insurance employees stayed put. And there were lots of reasons behind that. One was job security. Our business is pretty secure. We've learned now that we can survive a financial crisis. We've certainly been able to survive weather crisis, right? Hurricanes, wildfires. But probably more importantly, now we've been able to survive a pandemic. And so job security obviously is important to everybody. And for the folks that are in our industry, that was one of the number one reasons. The other one was that there's more career options within insurance companies. You know, there's so many different jobs available. So if it's sales that you don't want to be in, but you still want to work and you want to work from home, you could be an inside adjuster, or you could be an underwriter, or you could be, in some cases, customer service rep, where they're now in our company are taking phone calls from home. Most people that are in insurance tend to stick with insurance. You know, once they get us, it's sometimes hard to find us, but once they get us, it's kind of hard not to stay in our business. I've been doing this for 44 years. I was job eliminated once 20 years ago, and my son said to me, well, why don't you go do something else? And my response was, one, I don't really know anything else, and two, I really like this business. And so people tend to stick with our industry once they're in it. We do have a higher average age in the insurance industry, and that's changing dramatically right now. Baby boomers like myself and others are very close to retirement, and we're starting to see that shift in companies already. I can tell you within my team, we've seen a pretty dramatic shift from baby boomers to millennials, and even some Gen Zs now coming into my particular group. And the last one is that the industry is continuing to change. Now, I would tell you the change is like sort of turning a aircraft carrier. It doesn't turn on a dime. It takes a lot of water for that aircraft carrier to turn around. But InsurTech is definitely affecting our businesses, and it's bringing in more opportunities for people to sort of think outside the box about how we've always been and find better solutions, either technology-based or validated resources that are outside of what we normally have the access to. And so those are the reasons Jacobson found as to why we didn't see that giant spike in the insurance industry. And I will go back to, it really came back to, because we could shift gears in a relatively short period of time, as long as we were willing, and I know our employees were, that we didn't see that giant spike in unemployment or people being laid off. The quote from MIT Sloan professor Retzev Levi says, there are times when there's a major disruption that suddenly implies that what worked so far is not going to work anymore, and you need a new playbook. And I think that's really what happened in March of 2020, is that the world had changed in front of us, and we really needed a new playbook. And so I've taken that playbook sort of concept, and what I'd like everybody to do today is that as we navigate the new normal, if you have a piece of paper handy, draw a line down the middle. On one column, put employee, and the other column, put employer. And if you fall into both of those categories like I do, as we go through this, there'll be things that I hope that you gain from this as an employee, and particularly as an employer, that you may be able to apply to make it your playbook as we move forward. Because this is not going to change. Where we are is where we are as a country, as an industry, globally, we are where we are because of the capabilities that we have now, that we've found that we have now that we could do effectively. So navigating that new norm, we need a playbook to get to that point. So here's a question. First thing on the list is recruiting. So I'm curious, has any of you recruited virtually? If you want to just pop a quick question or a quick response in the chat. And then the second question would be, have you virtually changed jobs? All day long? Yep, yep. Good. What I hope to be able to share with you today is some of the experiences I had and the insights I've been able to gain through this, because during this time where we were working from home was also lots of turmoil in the insurance market in Florida. And I was forced into a position of having to hire more people. And we really thought long and hard about how we would accomplish that in a virtual world. And so there's some insights that will come out of that will help you from an employer perspective. But I also looked at it from the perspective of an employee. And so my advice to others, and even myself, is as I start to look at opportunities, if I do, what are the things that are most important to me? And can I find that opportunity out there in the marketplace? And I would tell you today, there's certainly much more opportunity to do that. So the playbook looks like this. These are the areas I'm going to cover today. Talk about recruiting and retaining employees, interviewing, the onboarding and training program, which is, I know, music to everybody on this call, and me too, because I am a trainer as well. Engagement, how do we keep people engaged? So once we get them on board and feel they're comfortable in doing the job, how do we make them feel part of the group? How do we advance our culture? And does culture change because we're now remote? Can we use this opportunity to advance diversity? And I think there's a huge opportunity there. And then the last part, and I purposely wrote it this way. We talk about work-life balance, but now we're in an environment where it's really life-work balance, and we'll talk about that. So the game plan has changed. It's blocking and tackling, but these are the areas I think that I'd like to share with you today. So again, I'm going to look at this from employer and employee perspective, right? And so recruiting and retaining in the new normal, as an employer, it's really important that you do market research. You find out what other opportunities are out there. Who are you competing against for the type of talent you want to bring into your operation, right? And so understand that. And it's easy to do. Just go out to Indeed or some of the other posting sites and see what their job descriptions look like. Are they listing them as remote? Are they making the setting an expectation for that person who's looking for a job in a particular situation? Maybe they want to be in the office. Maybe they want to work part-time in the office. Maybe they want to work exclusively from home. Find out where the market is. Find your niche in that marketplace. The next one, it's one of my favorites. I talk to my son-in-law all the time about this. He's an HR professional, and he just rails at job descriptions because they're horrible. But are your job descriptions really describing what the job is, so that people get a good sense, even before they decide to apply, that the skills that they have may match? And we'll talk about the employee side of that. But good job descriptions are important. So they need to be very specific about what the opportunity is for that. And I would tell you that most of the job descriptions I've seen in the past, and actually once before we rewrote all of them back in March of 2020, were just a lot of word salad. There really wasn't anything meaningful in those. And so we took the opportunity to do that, fix that. And then the last part of that is I call fix the recruiting process. And we'll talk about some of the aspects of that, but how are we recruiting? Are we using the right resources? Are we going to the right places? We used to go to greatinsurancejobs.com. Now we start to go to Indeed. Are you using recruiters or not? Depending on the talent you're looking for, you need to be smart about what that process looks like. It's not the same for every job level. And I think working with our HR professionals, we really found a solution that was bringing us much better opportunities. So as an employer, if there's anything on there and you're an employer, hopefully you write down those ideas on your sheet. The new normal for employees is do your homework. I can tell you, I've interviewed a lot of candidates who actually took a time to make sure they understood who we were and what we do, what's important to us, what our business looks like, how do we interact. And they did some even deeper research to look into the internet, Google, Florida Peninsula Insurance, to see what sort of things we're publishing. What do our LinkedIn posts look like? Our Facebook posts. As an employee, you need to make sure you do the homework, your homework. And again, so that you can balance to sort of match your skills, which is the next one, right? If you're really good at transactional type underwriting work, then and you'd like to find that, good job descriptions are going to help you. And if the description matches what your skill is, then that's one that you probably want to apply for. Learn more about. You're not going to get everything through that job posting, but you're going to get a better sense. So understand who the carriers are, and then make sure that skills match. The one thing I will tell you, and this happened in an interview, and it was kind of humorous, actually, a very highly qualified individual, and we'd gone through, talked about what his experiences were, and then we talked about what the opportunity was with the job, so that we could sort of match things up. And as we went through that, we would ask, how does this job expectation fit your skills? And we got good feedback. And then we open up for questions. And the first question was, is this job remote? Which the posting said remote. So, but any of it, don't open with, if that's what you want, don't open with, is the job remote? Open with some meaningful questions about the opportunity or the company, right? Show you did your homework, back to the top of that. And don't just lead with, oh, what are the benefits? Or do I get 2 weeks paid vacation? Those are good questions to ask at some point, but I wouldn't necessarily lead with those questions. It didn't impact us. We did make an offer to that individual. He found another job, unfortunately for us, because we thought he was real qualified. But it was just an interesting question that came immediately out. Is this job remote? And I wanted to say, did you read the posting? It says it right on there, remote, but I didn't. But the important thing in recruiting, I guess from my view, and this is really one of the stories I think that's been a real success for us, is you have to cast a bigger net. You have to find an opportunity to enhance the denominator, if you will, of potential candidates, right? And so but early in the pandemic, when we were trying to hire, we were listing it in the same places, and the posting said it was in Sarasota, Florida, which that's where our underwriting offices are. And we had set that office up 3 years ago and done a lot of heavy marketing and recruiting in that area for staff. And I found about a month in that every resume that we were getting were resumes that we had gotten before, of people that really weren't qualified for the job. They didn't have the same skill sets of what we were looking for. And I was getting a little frustrated. And probably people are wondering, well, how can you remember, Mike? Well, I keep a copy of every resume that we get. Okay, that I'm an underwriter. I apologize for that, but that's the reality of my life. But after a while, my managers and I, we were getting very frustrated, and I called our HR VP and said, Judy, could we put the word remote next to right in the heading of our postings, underwriting tech or underwriter, and put remote right next to it. And what was interesting was, as soon as we did that, the resumes started pouring in. They were from Florida, they were from North Carolina, from Tennessee, from South Carolina, from Georgia. All of a sudden, and the quality of the resumes we were getting was significantly better than what we were experiencing just recruiting in our normal area and limiting ourselves to people that would live within 50 miles or 40 miles of our office in Sarasota. And that was a huge change for us. The caliber of the candidates we were interviewing and hiring was much better than what we were seeing sort of post-pandemic in this as we began this recruiting process. And I think about that. I was talking to a friend of mine who works for an insurance company in New Hampshire, and they're in a small town in New Hampshire. There's not a lot of insurance people that live there. It's a sort of farming dairy community, and they were struggling. And I said, had you thought about putting remote? And immediately the response was, oh, I can't have a remote underwriter. I said, well, I used to think that too, but it's actually, it could work. And I'll tell you why. And they changed. They put their posting out and they said remote, and they got candidates from Illinois and Kansas and Texas. And he said, we have so many good qualified candidates for a very technical commercial lines underwriting position. He says, it's hard to pick the one we really want. Casting a bigger net is going to make a difference. And I think you're starting to see that today. I know when I look at postings locally for the companies that do business in Florida, we're not the only ones putting remote down, and I think that really helps to get better candidates in the door. So I think the important thing to think about in terms of recruiting, if you, as an employer and as an employee, is don't just think local. Think statewide, countrywide, maybe even global. I mean, if you have a very technical position, maybe a cyber liability underwriter position, there aren't a lot of those. So if you want to increase the denominator, put remote and let it out to the world. Better probably find some really qualified candidates for that job. You got to figure out how to make that happen. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that's an important thing to think about in this new world that we're in today. This new normal is, don't just think everybody's going to drive 30 miles or 20 miles or 15 miles from home to the office. Many people want to work remote, and it's up to you and them to find the way to make that work. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is what will end up happening, I think, in the world today. And I think we're already starting to see this. I hear a lot of feedback. Everything I read and those I talk to is that, there are going to be employers that have remote employees, and there's going to be employers that have hybrid. So maybe 2 days in the office and 3 days out, or a week a month, or whatever. And there's some that are still being insistent on being in office. I mean, I think Tesla is one where, Elon Musk came out very clearly and said, if you want to work for us, you have to work 40 hours a week in the office. Well, that's pretty much saying you can't work remote. You can work remote after hours, but you have to be in the office. And that's a tough place to be. It may be the right thing for them. It's really a decision that any employer needs to make because employees, as an employee, I may be looking at this and saying, I really only want to work for a company where I can be remote. Or, yeah, I'll go in the office a couple times a week, or maybe a week a month, and spend some time in the office. Or I have some employees that even throughout the pandemic, 2 of my employees ended up working in the office every day like I did. We're all masked up, and we were separated in the office. At a 40-person office, 4 people were there. So it was pretty easy to stay apart from each other. But this is the new normal in terms of that. So I think as you think about that as an employee and an employer, where do you fit in this? And then move in that direction. So here's some tips for working from home. I thought these were great. I think it's important. Communication is important, obviously, and regular proactive communication. So if your leadership doesn't reach out to you, make sure you reach out to them. I will tell you, as I talk about the employer side of that, we'll talk about communication. Any employer that's just going to rely on the employee to reach out to them, I think we'll lose in the end. But it's important as an employee to think about that. Make sure you understand what the expectations of the job are. Dress for the job from the waist up. We're sort of an on-camera company. I make it clear now, these are the on-camera days and these are the not on-camera days, because I understand, this is not easy, not hard to do every day. I comb my hair, wash it, put lots of product on my hair and beard. But I know ladies, make sure your hair is right. So on off-camera days are fine too, but I was joking with Sandy and Kathy, but I'm not going to stand up because the camouflage shorts I'm wearing right now are probably not the image that you want to leave with. But I think it's important to dress properly, even if you're working from home and you're going to be on. But I don't have issue with someone who happens to be wearing a baseball cap. Man, woman or man, it doesn't matter to me. It's more important to me that the job's getting done. Make sure you structure your days. I have some who start at 7 o'clock. They did when they're in the office, and they do at home. But you need to talk about that. Make sure that you are not becoming a slave to the work environment in your home. So structure is important. There are some really great tools to help you with timing. If you need to take a 5-minute break every hour to walk around, go to the bathroom, get another cup of coffee, take a load of wash out or out of the dryer and fold it. Those things would have happened in the office anyway. So make sure that you're doing that you're not just anchored to that desk in front of that screen. Have a dedicated space. I'm fortunate I have a dedicated space here. I know a lot of my folks are either in their dining room, their kitchen, they're in a bedroom. define the space, because it's important that you do that, because at some point, even for me, when I'm here, I'm working, but at the end of the day, the door is closed and I don't come back unless my boss wanted something that I absolutely have to get done. But close the door, separate yourself, because that life work balance piece that I mentioned before is really important. Again, make sure you take breaks, walk the dog, fold the clothes, whatever it might be. Exercise too. I think exercise is important because it keeps you your energy levels high, right? So if you're regular exercising, you're not going to gain that 15 pounds of COVID weight like I did, because the pantry was way too close to where my office was at home. But so exercise is important in this, and then have occasional in-person meetings. So if the office is open and it's willing, certainly reach out as an employee to your manager and say, I'm going to be in the office tomorrow to talk about a particular risk or situation. But have those. We've talked about having those more as group sessions so that we can do some team building stuff that we would have normally done if we were all in the office together. To have those occasional team meetings and bring people in from the remote areas. I have underwriters in Texas, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia. I know I'm missing others. One in Alabama, and me in Chicago. So, I mean, we have people pretty much all over the country. But those are important things to think about in terms of that whole process. If you do those things, as an employee and employer, there's really, it has to work well together for both, right? Ultimately. And so if you find the right mix for you, then I encourage you to stay with it, and make sure, and we'll talk about it in a minute, make sure that the employer is really as committed to it as you are. So I think about interviewing. I mentioned that, anybody done virtual interview, and I saw some of the responses in there, but I think doing virtual interviews was a real challenge for us at first. But we do it a little different. So we don't do multiple interviews anymore. So we don't stretch this process out for two reasons. One, it's really not necessary because of Teams and Zoom. Secondly, it just drags the process on. And in this marketplace today, with potential employees, candidates can now not have to take as much time away from the office to interview. Most of our interviews at noontime, imagine that, during lunch. So I don't have to travel anywhere, get in my car, worry about being dressed up in the office one day and everybody wondering where I'm interviewing, right? I can do this now at really sort of within my schedule, right? So we don't do multiple interviews. The only time we might go back is we have some questions that came out of the initial interview, but we do panel interviews. The thing is we tell the candidates that there are going to be 3 people on the interview and who those people are. So they're not surprised. They don't show up with 3 faces looking at them. But the panel interview has really worked well for us. And I would encourage anybody who's doing virtual interviews to do that. The value of that is I may think of a question that I want to know about while I'm individually interviewing somebody, but collectively now my 2 managers and I, when we interview, we're able to feed off each other. So somebody might ask a question and maybe the follow-up comes from me. It's much more engaging. It's more of a conversation than I ask you questions and then I start writing feverishly down on a piece of paper. Probably more distracted by writing than actually listening to that particular conversation. In some circumstances where I couldn't be there for the interview, we've told the candidate that we were going to record the interview. They were welcome to that. And it helped me, then I could hear and see that candidate, even though I wasn't in the room, and respond to that pretty quickly. We do consensus almost immediately. Unless there's questions that we had that didn't get answered, as soon as the interview is over, we get back on Teams and we do our consensus right there. And we feed off each other, ask questions. What did you think? How would they fit in? How would they fit in with the team? Do you sense, do they have the right skill sets to do the job that we're asking them to do? We want to respond quickly. No one wants to be ghosted by a company where they've done an interview and then weeks or days go by. I think the expectation now is days. It used to be weeks. We want to respond as quickly as possible. Yes, we believe you're a candidate, or no, we don't. Thank you very much. we leave that to our HR professionals to handle that, but we can sense right away. And then we try to make the best offer we can. So we look at the ranges of everybody on our team and the person coming in and their skill sets, experiences, and try to make sure that we're not just bringing them in for an entry level position at the entry level rate. We're balancing that with their experience and make the best offers. And then the last part of this is that we are very clear if we're interviewing someone for a remote that we're committed to that work status. So when somebody from Georgia is interviewing with us, we tell them, no, you're not going to have to come into the office at any point in time. For employees, I think it's important in the interviewing process to ask these sorts of questions, like how committed are you long-term to this remote? How does it affect my compensation? I think that's a very fair question. In our world, it doesn't matter if you're remote or you're one of the few that's in the office right now. Everybody gets paid based on their merit and their skill sets. The next part is, and I always tell people, negotiate your paid time off. If you're an experienced person who's already at 3 weeks, we start everybody at 3 weeks vacation. But if you're someone like me who's at 4 weeks vacation, negotiate that. That's an easy negotiation as an employee. And any employer that doesn't think that way, I think it's short-sighted. So many people don't take all their vacation anyway. So it's an offering that makes people feel more comfortable making that transition from one company to another, particularly people who have lots of experience. You know, will their peers be jealous? Well, in our world, so many, 60% of my team now is remote. The other 40 still remote due to COVID. And some are going to come back on a hybrid basis, but there are many of them that won't. But will their peers be jealous? You need to make sure that they understand your commitment to that, and not only as an employer, how you see that in the future. I think it's important to have managers with experience with remote people. So I had the advantage of being able to do that. And I've worked hard with my team of supervisors and my managers to make sure that they're engaged as much as they can be with that new candidate and members of their team on a regular basis. Not to just think they're only going to hear from them when there's a question. You need to reach out more frequently, because you don't have that opportunity of, as what I call management by walking around, where you could just stop by a cubicle and ask a question. I was joking earlier with Sandy and Kathy, but I have this bad habit of doing it at 4 o'clock on Thursdays, which sends panic amongst my people, because I guess that's when people get laid off or whatever. So I'm trying to be more deliberate. I do it at noontime or in the morning, but I like to know what's happening in their lives, and probably more importantly, that I could share with them some of the things that we're doing that they might not have heard about. Advancement's important too. I think it's a great question to ask, and you need to be prepared to answer that. So during COVID, we promoted 5 people during COVID. One was in a trainer position, one was a supervisor, and a number of them were underwriting technicians who moved into the underwriting ranks. And we make a big deal out about it. We send messages out to the whole company, letting everybody know they've been promoted. And then I reached out to our senior leadership and said, please respond to those individuals. Don't do reply all. Send a message directly to that person who got a promotion. It's very, very meaningful when the CEO and the president send a message saying, you know, hey, Sandy, congratulations on your promotion to underwriter 2, right? Thank you for your commitment to the company. And then the last part is, you know, how will I feel part of the team? And I think that's the piece that when we talk about some of the issues or some of the things that we've learned about how to stay engaged, we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's a great question. So I know the answer to this one before I even asked, just based on the audience here, but I'm sure your in-person onboarding process is very effective, because we're all great trainers and educators. But that's a question I'll ask a lot of people. You know, I asked that of our team when we first started doing this. How good is the process we have today? Does it work in this environment? We had to do some reconfiguration of our training. We had an identified trainer that managed that. And we had to work with that individual to make sure that they understood that they're not going to have that chance to just walk by their desk one day, or the person get up and come into their office. It's like you have to have opportunities to talk to them during the day. We started out sort of ad hoc, but then we said, you know, it's got to be scheduled so that they know, hey, if I have these questions, I can save them, and then I can get with my trainer and deal with those. And more importantly, can you deliver onboarding virtually? And I would tell you, based on my feedback, because I ask all new employees that come through after they've been on the desk, or now they're on the desk and they're doing their work. I ask them specific questions about the training, and more importantly, how can we make it better? Some were reluctant to respond to me, but many of them give me great feedback, and I take it back to our trainer and supervisors and managers and say, okay, here's a suggestion that came out of this. We probably need to focus a little bit more on, systems related stuff, or who to call, or whatever it might be. But I think that's an important part of that. So the important part about onboarding, in my view, is sort of this: in the virtual world, it's the same goals as you have when you are in person, right? It's just a new venue, it's just a new way of doing it, and how effective can you be at that? And the beauty of these training now, virtual world, is it doesn't have to be just the trainer and the trainee. The supervisor or the trainer or the manager can be on that call too, and providing support, but more importantly, seeing how that interaction's happening so they can make it better. I think it's important to think like a new hire. So think about like a new hire who's not in the office. What would you want? What would you need? And build that into your training. I think it's in place to introduce your culture. That should happen during the interview process, but probably more importantly, it needs to continue on through that initial onboarding process, so they understand that we do these things, we're involved in these community involvement things. This is where our website is. This is the information that's available to us. Our senior leadership wants feedback. All those sorts of things that are very specific to us as a company. Make sure our content's updated, which we've done. We continue to do. The communicate piece, I'll talk about that more in detail in a little bit, but I think that's important. And then the most important part, and I know everybody on this call knows this, is that feedback is so critical. Get feedback so that as trainers or onboarding, we can be better, so that we end up with a better process and a more engaged employee. So talking about communication. So in the world of and the notion of engagement, communication is the key. I probably went overboard initially. I met with my supervisors 3 times a week, my managers every day. That was new. We had to know what was going on. There were lots of things going on with the systems and equipment and all the rest of that. So having regular meetings was important. We did them on Teams, and the cameras were on. And about a year into that, one of my supervisors said, can we make these 3 times a week instead of, in fact, can we make them 2 times a week? Because nothing happens between Friday and Monday. And we have a meeting on Monday and Friday. Can we make it Wednesday and Friday? And I said, sure. But recognize if I want to reach out to you, I'm going to. They were fine with that. So we sort of went overkill at first, but I think that's important in this. And how I translate that is, new people probably need the same sort of approach that we did initially, to make sure that they continue to be engaged, that they don't feel like they're on an island out there as they move forward. So all forms of communication, whether it be emails, texts, Teams, are all important, and frequency is really important. And as people are comfortable with their role, the frequency could diminish, but the new people really need to know what's going on in the organization and have regular contact, not just with the trainer, but with their supervisor, eventually their supervisor and the management team. So communication is such an important part of this. One of the things we started to do is that when we bring a new hire on, we attach to that person one of our more experienced people as their buddy. And that's a person that they can ask questions that they might want to ask the supervisor directly, like, do they really mean this? Or is this how we really do this? It's a great opportunity to start to build some camaraderie amongst the team. And more importantly, they have another source they can go to. I can't tell you how many times I learned from Howard, who sat next to me when I was a brand new underwriter 44 years ago. I would wheel my chair in his cubicle and ask him questions. And, he was very tolerant of me doing that, but it had a huge impact. So what I tried to create is Howard in sort of a more direct and a specific process. And so we try to match people up as best we can. But the communication piece for engagement, and that goes both directions, not just that the company, the employer is communicating to the employee, but the employee is communicating back. Hey, I don't get this, or why are we doing this? Have to feel comfortable in being able to do that. Maybe they do it with their buddy. Maybe they'll do it with their supervisor. The one thing the supervisors do every week, they have a team meeting and then they have individual meetings with all their folks. And then monthly, they have their feedback session. So they actually sit with each member of their team and they go through their quality results and their productivity results. So they know exactly where they stand. Again, back to those expectations, right? This is the expectations of the job. This is how you're performing. And I know people are happy we do that. We see significant improvement when we go through that, because the supervisor's responsibility then is to make sure that if there's an area where there needs to be additional training or more support or more help, that it's very clear and they focus on that. So stay connected. But more importantly, I think, and that's this part of the model, you got to be deliberate about this. You have to make sure that it's one of those things, if you promise to do it, if you say you're going to do it, then you better do it. If you don't do it, they'll know. And then they'll start to question your ability or your willingness to keep them engaged. So be deliberate about that. And that's something as simple as a 4 o'clock in the afternoon Teams call request from Mike, just wanting to talk about, hey, how'd your son do in a football game? Or how's the new puppy? Or those sorts of things. It's an important part of that whole process of engagement. I feel part of the organization all the way up to the guy who runs the department, because he's interested in what I do, my work. I always talk about the work and the work that they do, and then talk about them as a personal. So sort of this business personal sort of approach to that. But I leave the, as I call the yeah buts out of there. So if you're going to praise someone, the next words out of your mouth should never be, yeah, but if you did this, save that for another call. Don't destroy that opportunity to make people feel good about what they do. So being part of the team is important. And we're starting now that things have sort of opened up a bit more. We're talking about doing some total team meetings where all of remote employees will come in probably for a day and a half. We'll have some training opportunities. We'll do some team building. We'll have a couple of meals together. We'll break them up into groups in terms of their experiences or their skill sets, the teams, the same level of employee they work with. And then some of the things we do are sort of silly things, but we did a send a picture of your pets in or your children, or so that everybody get the sense of, hey, Mike's got 2 dogs and 2 cats, and Marty's got 2 dogs and a cat. Because we see them on the calls. I know he's not here because I closed the door, but one of my cats likes to walk in front of the screen while I'm talking because he wants attention. But that's an important part of being part of the team, is that it's not just the work we do and the issues we're dealing with every day, but these are the things that are part of our lives. We see them in the background oftentimes, the children in the room or the husband or wife walking behind you. Hopefully they're properly attired, but I think that's a big piece of the whole being part of the team. This is the one thing that I was most concerned about as we went remote, and that's what I always call the over-the-wall conversation. It's this whole notion of, it was sitting next to Howard, and I would ask him a question. Hey, what do you think about this risk? And we would talk about it, and he would give me his advice, and then I'd make a decision. How do we create that same thing when people are in Austin, Texas, and Greensboro, North Carolina? How do we create that? And what I came to the conclusion was, I could wheel into anyone's office by virtue of Teams. I have to invite myself first. I think that's an important part of it, but it's a really easy thing to do. And you can sort of have those conversations about risk, but more importantly, you can start to build rapport and understanding of each other's challenges working from home. And I think that's a piece we worked hard at, and I think we've done a really great job. And it's something that I would encourage. If you're an employer side, if you want to write it on your list playbook, solve the over-the-wall conversation, because I think that's an important part of our business, any business really. It's that idea of, like, if you're in the office, what's the code for the copier, right? Well, there's different challenges we face right now, systems-wise, that. And sometimes it's better to talk to one of your peers about it than it is to talk to a supervisor or manager, because you don't want to let them know that you really don't know what you're doing, even though you do. But having that opportunity, we encourage it. We tell them, go on Teams, talk to each other. I know the texting goes on, or through the chats in our Teams program, and I encourage that, because that's the piece that we had to fill the gap. And I think we've done a great job of that. So now that we're in a non-office centric culture, right? If you become all remote or some hybrid of that, where you don't have an in-office, where you can see the memorabilia hanging on the walls and the statues and the trophies and, you know, the giant logos everywhere and all of the rest of that, how do you create that sense now? And so, interestingly enough, as I'm thinking about this, you know, culture doesn't need a physical address. Culture is I would call it almost a spirit. It's sort of what drives us as an organization. It comes from the top, hopefully, and they try to make that clear. And then it's most important that the next layer and then the layers below that of leadership within a company have to have the same notion, have the same feelings about what the culture is, and can speak to it openly. If that happens, then you don't need a physical address to have culture. So the space, you know, the artifacts you might have, if you work for the Hartford Insurance Company, the Stag, which apparently he has a name. I didn't know that. I can't remember what it is now. You know, mantras, the deep values certainly are important. It's the history of your company, but really the culture is what is the vision and mission of the company? Does everybody understand it? And can you communicate it even in a virtual world, I guess? Use the technologies that are available to you. Have this employee experience champion. So this is that individual that is your buddy, if you will. So they can communicate with that person if they don't want to talk to their manager about it. It's sort of a safe place, if you will. We have to have leaders teach each other as well through this whole process in terms of the culture. Are we expressing it in the same sense? Do we really truly understand what the culture is? And then how do we communicate it? Forget the foosball tables, because the days of that are over. I think they took them out of, I think it was Google that had that, or one of the tech companies. That's not, they put those in because they wanted people to come to the office. Now we have people at home. So we don't need foosball tables in an office anymore, because if people want to work from home, that really doesn't matter to them. Again, I can't emphasize enough, be deliberate about how you communicate that culture. And there has to be a workplace and a home culture. We have to recognize there's two, right? So we're invading their home with work, but they have a culture in their own home, and we have to accept that and make sure that we don't diminish that for the purpose of work. The work is important. We all do it to feed our families, whatever our motivations are to work. But there's a home culture as well. And as employers, if you want to write this on the employer side, make sure that you don't infringe on the home culture with the work culture, because I think that's an important thing to keep people engaged and make them really feel like they are part of something. So just quickly about advancing diversity, I thought this next quote was really pretty profound. And it was by Hayden Brown, who's the CEO of a company called Upwork. And he says, I can't tell you the number of CEOs I talk to who are thinking, I have to solve the diversity challenge in my business. And remote work is one of the key tools. He says, we have to let go to this very office-centric culture and incorporate people who are in a lot of geographies. And I would tell you my personal experience. Years ago, we were trying to diversify our team in the Chicago suburbs. We were in Hoffman Estates, and we wanted to bring in a much more diverse workforce. And so we would recruit at DePaul University, had a multicultural job fair every year. And I probably went 4 or 5 years in a row, and we recruited a lot of people who lived in the city, very different backgrounds, which is really important in the underwriting role, because it's different perspectives that hopefully, along with the guidelines and the direction of the company, the appetite of the company is really important. And we recruited people, but the commutes were horrible. There was no way to get there. Some of those folks, they would drive, 40 miles, but it took them 2 hours. And you can imagine over time, we lost those people. But today, I can recruit people anywhere, really, if they have the skill sets to do the job, and we're confident that they could do that, and we could train them and keep them engaged. It doesn't matter where they are, but we still have to recognize that they do come from a more diverse perspective of life and culture. And so incorporating that in the process, it's not just about hiring them, but then making them feel included in everything we do. That's the important thing. And so all remote, that's probably the biggest challenge. doesn't matter where you come from. More importantly, how do you keep everybody engaged and on the same plane if you go as you're going forward? So I thought that was profound, and I think the companies who are doing this and recognizing that this is opportunity for them to improve their organizations. We all know that a more diverse workforce will produce better results. Every research paper I've ever read on that says that. So now's an opportunity for, I think, companies, because of remote working, to be able to do that where geography doesn't come into play. So if I could offer you one last thing, I would tell you this. There's now a greater ability for people to fit work into their lives because they're at home. I have folks that were driving 45 miles to get to the office, take them an hour every day. Their commute is as far as the kitchen to wherever they work with their cup of coffee or glass of orange juice or bowl of cereal, instead of having lives that squeeze into their work. And so that's where Anthony Klotz, associate professor at Texas A&M, this is his quote, and this hit me very hard. I get it now. We talk so much about work life, but it's really life work. Life is still most of what you spend your time at. You spend 8 hours in the office working, and that's 5 days a week. You spend all the rest of the time in your life, whether it's your family or whatever you do that's outside of what your work is, taking care of your dogs, your kids, your parents, traveling, whatever it may be. The fact that if you think about it in terms of life work as opposed to work life, and then understand that it's imperative as leadership in companies to tell people that at 5 o'clock, unless you're working on something you just got a call 5 minutes before 5, close out, get out of the system. Unless the work is so backed up, and we've asked you to spend a little bit extra time, but spend time, get away from the office, because that's where the burnout happens, I think, in remote, is that I sit down sometimes here at 7 in the morning, and then the next thing I know, I look out the window and it's dark because I'm so deeply entrenched in what I'm doing. And dogs have been in and out of here probably a dozen times waiting for a walk, but I'm so engaged. And now I've gotten to the point where I set a timer to go off at 5 o'clock. And then unless it's absolutely something I have to do, I shut it down and I go spend time with my family. So that's a subtle change, but it's, I think, something, as you think about it, both as an employee and an employer, have to be on the same page with this. The work's important. There's no question about it. But your life, if you have a strong or happy life and work, I think you're a much more fulfilled person. So the first step towards change is awareness. I think we've gotten that point. The awareness that the world has changed around us. There is a new normal. It's there. The second step is acceptance. I think many of us have accepted it. Now, I can tell you I have. So the next piece of this is execution of a game plan, whether the playbook, if you will, if you're an employee or an employer, how am I going to accomplish the things that I want, and how am I going to make sure that I'm matched up in the way that really feels. So I took the whole time, and I apologize for that, but if there are any other, I'm just going to scroll through here. Are there any questions, Sandy, that came up that?
We did have, Chris Beheimer, you had a question earlier, and after Chris, Kate, you just posed a question as well. So Chris, if you wanted to unmute, we could talk, and you guys are welcome. Even we're almost at the top of the hour, but you're welcome to stay on and chat with us. Chris, you were talking about insurtech firms and had a question about staff reduction there when we were talking about the shift in employment.
Yeah, I've noticed over the last couple of days that a number of insurtech firms, staff reductions, Thimble, X, on and on and on. And I wondered if Mike saw that coming, or if that's a trend he expects to see continue.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I'm not surprised in some respects. It really depends on where you are. I can tell you in the Florida market, which I know very, very well, we've had a number of companies go out of business. They're in insolvency right now. The policyholders are being cast off to the marketplace. And so there's a lot of available staff in those situations. I wonder too, particularly with the insurtechs, in particular, their customers are probably in the same sort of mode that a lot of us are, and that is, we're dealing with some inflation issues right now, and because of that, are people spending, carriers, any businesses spending money on insurtech related activities now, or are they sort of waiting for things to sort of improve relative to that? I'm really not surprised with some of that. It's unfortunate. I hate to see that. I will tell you, in Florida, we had one company, Lighthouse, who is now insolvent, and we hired 4 people from there. And there's probably some of the better hires we've had in a long time. Federated National most recently laid off about 60% of their staff, and we've hired a few folks from there. So that's a blessing and a curse, I guess. Certainly for the employee, no one wants to go through that. I was job eliminated 20 years ago. It's a very traumatic thing. I know exactly what people are dealing with that. I was blessed that I was high enough in an organization that financially it wasn't a big challenge for me. And as soon as the marketplace got the sense that I was now available, there was a number of recruiters that I had worked with in the past that immediately started reaching out to me saying, "Hey, what are you going to do?" And I went about 3 months without a job. But I think that's certainly an issue that I think we face in the marketplace today. It's really, I think the door's open to some of these folks now because you don't have to physically be there. So many places are now much more willing to allow you to work from wherever you want to work.
Thanks for the question, Chris, too.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks.
And then we have one more question from Kate. Kate's looking for any specific tips you might have related to younger hires who maybe aren't confident yet in their virtual communication skills. So maybe if you have a couple of quick tips, and then we could continue it offline, like they say, if you have anything else.
Sure. Yeah, I think initially when we bring them on board, there are one-on-one, so they get sort of that TLC from our trainer, and we try to start it at the interview process by, it's intimidating to see 3 faces, but for those who know me, I tend to be a little bit I try to sort of reduce the tension in the room by telling jokes. That's not necessarily that, but just sort of lighten things up, right? It doesn't have to be this really structured. So talking about things related to where they live, or the background is a great opening into the world of anybody, whether it's an employee or a candidate. So asking questions about what their life is like, that tends to soften things up a bit. When we put them in a team, we start with team meetings that are the whole group. So most of my teams are 8 or 9 people. And so you can be a bit of anonymous through that and kind of learn from other folks. I think one of the things we're starting to see, though, is that a lot of the newer folks, right, that are just in the industry, live through this whole thing virtually in the university ranks, if that's where they came from. We hired an individual from St. John's University, and she had been in the virtual world for some time. And so it was easy for her to sort of fit into what our expectations were relative to the virtually communicating through Teams and that. But I think that's a real challenge. What you don't want to do is call people out, because that will discourage them from being involved at all. So you have to be sensitive to that. The one-on-one meetings they have with their supervisors would happen if they were in the office or not. And I think that's the really opportunity to sort of build them up and make them feel more comfortable what they're doing. And then the other part is, and I mentioned it earlier, was, if you have positive feedback to share with folks, then make sure that you share the feedback first. You don't do the and but, because that helps build their confidence, right? And sometimes calling them out in front of the group is a good thing. And I try to do that with some regularity to say, congratulate people on what they've done, whether it be on a Teams meeting or in an email, on their results. I think that, again, is a confidence builder for someone who's maybe not comfortable being in that world.
That's great. Thanks again for that question. And yeah, thanks a lot for your insights on that, Mike.
Appreciate it.
And
Thank you.
if anyone else, if you're not connected with Mike, connect with him and carry on the conversation further. But this has been really helpful. A lot of our attendees have put in the chat how helpful this was and what a great presentation it was. I look forward to just getting my notes straight and creating my own playbook. So I think it was a great idea.
Yeah, not everything works for everybody. So that's the important thing, is that do what you feel comfortable with. The real answer to that is do something, right? Take a different path that you haven't done in the past, right? Sort of climb out of your own comfort zone. And I think we've all done that since March of 2020. It's getting out of our comfort zone. And now we have a new comfort zone.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Meg. His name is the Hartford Stag's name is Larry. Thank you, Meg.
Yay, Larry. Thanks everybody for attending, and please sign up for our webinar in August as well. It'll be, I believe, the third Friday in the month. So watch for that. Okay. Thanks so much. Have a great Friday.